Taylor Swift has released her 11th album, alluringly titled The Tortured Poets Department, which is allegedly a jab at her ex-boyfriend Joe Alwyn, who revealed that he had a group chat named The Tortured Man Club in a Variety interview. The title of this album unfortunately preemptively demonized Joe, and had a lot of people making assumptions and sent Taylor's army of attack dogs on him for months on end, especially given that The Tortured Poets was teased as the big breakup album. The album, at least from my interpretation, does not paint Joe Alwyn in a super villainous light though, but not exactly a positive one either. Apparently his biggest fault is his crippling depression and reluctance to marry Taylor after being together for so long, leaving her with the broken pieces and a broken heart. Per Taylor's standards, it's a very confessional album, and maybe even more direct than a lot of her previous work. From her lyrics, it definitely seems like Joe Alwyn is the great love of her life, or was at one point, until you realize she has someone else in mind. Taylor opens up the album with Fortnite featuring Post Malone, who was featured on both Beyonce and Taylor's records, but feels like an afterthought on both finished products. Taylor's being forthcoming about her alcohol dependency on the song, something that has been talked about in the media for a while, but never explicitly stated until now. Was supposed to be sent away, but they forgot to come and get me. I was a functioning alcoholic till nobody noticed my new aesthetic. All this to say, I hope you're okay. The lyrics allude to an alleged stay at a mental health facility, which is not exactly clear if she's using the facility as a metaphor or actually visited one, but she references it many times throughout the album. Unfortunately, a lot of this album appears to be about her controversial pairing with Matty Healy, who Taylor had gotten some flack for associating with after popping him up on her tours after his racially motivated comments. On But Daddy I Love Him, it seems like she not so subtly responded to the backlash she got for dating him, and everyone telling her it's not a good idea. I know it's crazy, but he's the one I want. I'll tell you something right now, I'd rather burn my whole life down than listening to one more second of all this bitching and moaning. I'll tell you something about my good name. It's mine along with all the disgrace. I don't cater to all these vipers dressed in empath's clothing. My biggest rebuttal to Taylor being annoyed that people have something to say about her relationships, in this case particularly allegedly being about her relationship with Matty Healy, is that she opened that can of worms a long time ago. She has built worlds and albums surrounding her relationships, famously dropping Easter eggs that lead to who she's talking about, and she often gets extremely detailed in a way that not many stars do. I don't subscribe to the age-old joke that Taylor only writes about her exes, or that she should be hounded about it, even if at a certain point she did play into it.
For me, making an album is about telling stories, making confessions, and writing songs so detailed that each guy knows which song is about him.
But it'd be a plain lie to claim it isn't a huge source of inspiration for her, and that she hasn't largely benefited from exploiting her own relationships and her romantic partners, which to some degree everyone does when they're writing about heartbreak. But Taylor tends to take it a bit further than most, which can be engaging, invasive, or both. There's many stars who have extremely personal songwriting regarding relationships, but still retain a level of mystery or at least refinement. Lana Del Rey and The Weeknd instantly come to mind. Taylor Swift is not one of those artists. Many times she's directly dropped trails that lead back to who she's talking about, even if that means subliminally spelling out their name in her album booklets, which has been a source of criticism due to her subjects often being subjected to harassment with little regard from Ms. Swift. Whether it aligns with how you enjoy consuming music is your personal preference. I'm not trying to be moral police on something as varied, personal, and nuanced as songwriting, especially since I've been a fan of a lot of her super personal and detailed records as well. But the fact of the matter is, she's opened up her relationships to the world. She's made it an integral part of her marketing. Of course, people are going to talk about it at this point, especially when you're parading them around at your musical events. Whether good or bad, I just don't think you can have it both ways. It might not always be fair, but it's the most realistic conclusion. She set that precedent herself. She also seemingly talks about how her and her lover bonded over certain things like Charlie Puth. She says, "You smoked then ate 7 bars of chocolate. We declared Charlie Puth should be a bigger artist." Which was very odd, especially considering some of the weird behavior Charlie Puth has shown, which seems to go against everything Taylor Swift has talked about throughout her career, and even in her personal experiences. But even more than that as well, Charlie Puth is just not a good artist. But he's pretty big too. I wonder what Taylor's definition of a big artist is given her status. On So Long London, which feels like a continuation and end to her previous song London Boy, she allegedly makes reference to her relationship with Joe Alwyn, where she basically alludes to his sadness and how it was emotionally draining for her. And also directly talks about her want for a stronger commitment. You swore that you loved me, but where were the clues? I died on the altar waiting for the proof. I think that lyric is stunning and one of the album's standouts. In another lyric from the song, she says, "You sacrificed us to the gods of your bluest days." It frames depression as if depression is a choice, which is interesting coming from Taylor Swift, who has been forthcoming about her own self-loathing in past songs like Anti-Hero. With that being said, I still feel like So Long London is one of the stronger moments on the album. The most ballsy song on the album is Do It With a Broken Heart, which sounds like a continuation of the Midnight's cut Bejeweled. Cause I'm a real tough kid, I can handle my shit. They said, babe, you gotta fake it till you make it, and I did. Lights, camera, bitch, smile, even when you wanna die. One of the songs that really stuck out to me though is Who's Afraid of Little Old Me. Crashed the party like a record scratch as I scream, who's afraid of little old me? She also further details her relationship with fame and her mental health in the song. I don't think I've heard a Taylor Swift album where she feels so consistently angry like she does on this album. And in some instances it makes sense, like you've been with someone for close to a decade and they won't commit to marriage, and that's something you've expressed that you wanted and you guys just drift apart. It's a less than favorable scenario. But the album also allegedly leans more into the Matty Healy situation. She constantly goes on and on about their chemistry, the frustration, and the fact that she's no longer with him. The lyrics, as far as the words and phrases, are also not the usual Taylor-styled lyrics. They feel extremely direct, but also very casual. A writing style that can be compared to artists like Phoebe Bridgers. And I do think there are more than a handful of lyrical clunkers and misses on this album where you can tell what angle she was going for, but she doesn't land it. For example, fall asleep like a tattooed golden retriever. What if he's written mine on my upper thigh only in my mind, one slip and falling back into the hedge maze. My friends all smell like weed or little babies. The second part of the album also has some weird, bad, and unsettling lyrics. I do find it odd that Taylor Swift allegedly wrote a diss track to Kim K titled Thank You Amy, which capitalizes the letters K-I-M in the title. In the year of 2024, why are we still in the Kimye beef? But more importantly, mentions her kids as some vindictive revenge bait. Like, you've already won the Kimye war, what else is new? There has to be better things to talk about. Secondly, why in the hell did she write a line romanticizing the 1800s? We would pick a decade we wished we could live in instead of this. I'd say the 1830s, but without all the racist. Apparently the song further expands on its context and how nostalgia can be a weird thing, as she follows it up by saying, "Seems like it was never even fun back then. Nostalgia is a mind's trick. If I'd been there, I'd hate it." But it just doesn't stick the landing. Of course it was a bad period filled with so much oppression and crisis. Why would you have nostalgia for it in the first place? It's common knowledge that so many negative historical events happened during that time period. It's the kind of nonsensical, disconnected lyric you'd expect from an extremely wealthy white person that doesn't consider the context of racial optics or oppression. In the sleeve notes for the album, Swift acknowledges both the turmoil of the relationship and the sharpness of her pen. It was a mutual manic phase, it was self-harm, it was house and then cardiac arrest, she writes. A smirk creeps onto the poet's face, because it's the worst man that I write best. She does partially tie up the album with some romance by seemingly praising her love with Travis Kelce on The Alchemy, which is filled with tons of football references. So both Post Malone and Florence and the Machine are featured on the album as well, and to me it feels like bringing a distant friend to a therapy session. It just doesn't work. Neither of the features are bad, but not significant either. But let's address more of the real cruxes of this album. The production. It is sonically in line with Midnight's, which is one of her more straightforward, plain, and generic sonic ventures. Midnight's has its moments of glory, and even produced some of my favorite Swift songs ever, but as a whole, it doesn't get my attention. Taylor has always been on the more safe side of production. You don't go into a Taylor Swift record expecting the eclecticism of Lana Del Rey, for example. No matter how much you can hear the Lana influence in her music, sonically she will make it safer, or even the sonic risk of someone like Lorde and the chances she took. And Billie Eilish, people who are known to be riskier production-wise, and whose influence can be heard on Midnight. albeit in a very sanitized and uncharacteristic manner. At some point, it was expected for a Taylor Swift album to have lively production, even if simple, but now she's completely leaned into sparse genericism, which also sounds actively late in terms of trends. Midnights was met with big commercial success and received some critical praise, ultimately winning Album of the Year, which is why I wouldn't be surprised if it gave Taylor the green light to follow in its footsteps. There's been a lot said about Jack Antonoff and his production, and Jack certainly has a signature style that mostly pulls from atmospheric 80s synth pop music, or on the other end of the spectrum, bare and dreamy piano ballads, and sometimes his production does indeed overlap, to where his songs he's produced sound very similar. But I think solely blaming Jack Antonoff is just too easy, and also removes the autonomy from Taylor, who was credited as a producer alongside Jack on all the songs on Midnights. Lana Del Rey's last record, Did You Know There's a Tunnel Under Ocean Boulevard, showed that Jack is still able to put together creative and forward-thinking tracks with a lot of detail and character, no matter how thin he spread himself amongst other pop stars. But I think it's nice to have a balance, because he didn't produce all of the songs on Ocean Boulevard, and even some that he did had other collaborators as well. But Jack is very capable of creating a good song, a great song even. It's not his album. Taylor Swift is very involved in her work. Tortured Poets feels like a companion piece to Midnights, and there's just no charm in the production. It blends into wallpaper. If only the production was half as bold as some of the lyrics are attempting to be. You would think the biggest star on earth would at least be keen to more sonic value. It's not like she can't afford the artistic risk, and it's a bit disappointing that this is the result, with all eyes on her and the world at her fingertips, which obviously means there's a certain comfortability she has at this point in her career. There's always been moments of genius with Taylor, and then she backs off and retreats. I could not predict that after widening her palette with more interesting chord progressions on Folklore, that she'd retreat to safer territory, especially after the praise it received and new life it gave to her career. Sure, Folklore wears its influences on its sleeve, but musically and composition-wise, it was well done. Also couldn't predict that after the genre-bending opus of Red, or the sparkling production of 1989, that we'd be met with the inconsistency of Reputation, or the bewildering childishness of Me. It now seems like history is repeating itself, except this time around Taylor's sticking to a certain formula. Also, there's not a lot of hooks and great melodies, and a lot of the melodies feel recycled and very similar throughout the record. Her writing is the wordiest and most crammed that it's ever been. I feel like if you're gonna sacrifice more thrilling production to make your music as palpable as possible, then it needs to at least be catchy, not devoid of both catchiness and interesting production. It reminds me of when Imogen Heap revealed the creative process behind the Taylor Swift deep cut Clean, which happens to be one of my absolute favorite Swift songs. Imogen says this: "So we tried a few things out, one of which had me going over to the keyboard to suggest a slightly odd chord progression. As I do like a bit of that on my own records, I played it to Taylor and she quite clearly said, 'I think we're going to lose them at this point.' And I said, 'Wow, that's why you sell millions of records and I don't. She is Taylor Swift and she knows best.' So we stuck to the chords." The story reveals that Taylor keeps commercial consumption in mind while creating music, which is fine, but her previous efforts have showed that she can pull off a balance, but currently it feels like she's flowing at one pace. The album is not terrible, but it is middling. Some moments would certainly be improved by a better musical bed. Taylor also seems at odds with her superstardom a lot on the record, stardom that she very clearly fights to have, but crumbles under pressure when the non-worship opinions come out. The album feels like Midnight's B-sides and vault tracks, and a lot of the themes feel like topics that Swift has done in a much better manner earlier in her career. She has nothing to prove anymore, but her albums still feel like she's trying to prove something, or perhaps trying to maintain her current unprecedented Titan status, while ultimately still coming up empty. This is the first Taylor Swift album that made me wonder if she's running out of ideas, or just trying to recapture the commercial glow and moment of her previous album, which in this case is Midnights. It almost feels like Taylor Swift is becoming the Marvel of pop music. Everything is starting to feel disenchanted, conveyor belt oriented, and a remix of the same formula. I know we're living in a world where Taylor Swift feels exempt from criticism, but even more so her work feels exempt from criticism. Not only because the wrath of her cult-like following will likely be felt, but also because of her winning war for ownership over her music. She has built her status up to staggering heights, that it feels like everything she does at this point gets showered in accolades and acclaim, and surely some of it is deserved, but it's the audible gasp when you dare to say anything that's not favorable or straight up praise. Even if you are someone like me who has enjoyed a lot of her music throughout her career, you'll likely be deemed a hater. It's the biggest star in the world. You want it to be good or even great. It has to be good. But it's honestly just okay at best. Taylor can coast off of name recognition. I think to some extent Taylor is suffering a bit from Drake syndrome. No matter what they release, they know it will sell. The album is just too long for what it is, especially considering the double side of the album, which just feels like it falls in the vein of the vault songs. And vault songs certainly make sense within the context of the re-recordings, but not every song needs to be heard. Some songs should stay in a vault. The album almost just feels like a straight to the point diary entry as opposed to the more diaristic and story-led songwriting. That soul aspect will likely appeal to a lot of people who have latched onto her personal life as a key point of interest. I've enjoyed many Taylor Swift albums and songs, but to me, Tortured Poets is not one of her great opus moments. It's just another uneven and plainly ordinary Taylor Swift album.